Hi guys, Alex, wake up! We're here. We're live.
You press the
We're
magic
live.
button.
I pressed the button without telling you, and it's another Friday live stream with the guys at Inventory. So, first of all, thanks to everyone who's going to tune in today. If you do planning on to, me and Alex are going to talk about some top tips on reducing a deposit dispute. Me and Alex will just have a brief chat, throw in some ideas on some nice little tips for landlords, letting agents. It's even good for tenants, these things, to help come up with ideas to reduce a deposit dispute. Um,
Definitely, I think it's a very important subject because let's be honest, nobody really wants to have a dispute. Like
no,
the tenants, the residents, students, whatever industry it is that you're in, they don't want to go through a dispute to get their deposit back.
yeah,
Equally, as a letting part of the lettings process, you don't want to have to fight to get things fixed.
no,
So
you just,
we all just want to merge together
yeah.
and reduce these sorts of outcomes, don't we? So
All an agent wants or a landlord wants is a tenant to move out and there be no issues because I can't imagine the cost and the time to get something sorted in a dispute, agreeing or negotiating with the tenant. I can just imagine it being an absolute nightmare. And
it's more the emotional investment.
yeah,
I mean, obviously, the physical cost is one thing, but the the emotional drain it has to actually fight to get something resolved.
yeah,
If we can offer a few things today that help reduce that, then fantastic. Obviously,
yeah,
if you are watching live, then please feel free to throw in a few comments,
yeah.
questions, whatever else. If you're watching on
I was,
demand on our YouTube channels or our social media
yeah,
pages, then obviously feel free to leave a comment and we'll get back to you. That's
yeah.
fine.
Good point there, because we're going to throw in some tips. But if you guys want to throw in some your own tips, then just chuck them in, and we'll obviously discuss them as we go. Yeah, I suppose we ought to mention what Imagehive does briefly before we get stuck in. So, we're a cloud-based property reporting platform where you can create unlimited property inspection reports, and we've got a relationship with the TDS, and our partnership with the TDS helps us learn a bit more about how disputes get arisen. Um, the TDS have kindly provided us with their statistical briefing, and that helps us understand what kind of disputes get raised. One of those things, Alex, I suppose, is obviously the main things that get raised for dispute are cleaning, damages, redecoration, gardening, and even rent arrears. So um, we were sat in the office yesterday, Alex, weren't we? And we was going through these statistics, and I said to you, what percentage of disputes are cleaning disputes? And you touching
Yeah.
50%, and you was quite surprised at that when I mentioned that to you.
Yeah, so what was it, 49% in
Yeah,
this was 2020 to 2021 statistics from the
yeah,
TDS. 49% of all disputes contained cleaning as a problem. So obviously from Inventory Hive's perspective, now this isn't a plug to use Inventory Hive, by the way. These are
no,
just
no,
ways to assist in all aspects of reducing these disputes. But I think from one thing on that, what you need to consider when actually completing a robust check-in report, so when the resident actually moves in the first place, is highlighting those common dispute areas where
yeah,
cleaning might arise. So you're thinking the insides of your ovens, the insides of your fridge, freezers, where there's going to be food residue potentially that's going to need that deep clean. I
yeah,
think the amount of ovens that I've seen that need cleaning at the end of a tenancy is quite high. So I think it's
yeah.
important to highlight those areas on an initial check-in.
Yeah. Another thing as well is you've got your bathrooms and toilets as well. Like if it's a long term tenancy, then it's quite often you might get some mold or damp in there as well because it's not being cleaned or aerated properly. Um, so I think it's a good point, Alex. Making sure on your checking report you record those common dispute items clearly, and the majority of those are cleaning, because then it gives some insight of what's expected at checkout as well. So I suppose one of my top tips for giving it's something probably to give to the tenant, is to educate the tenant what's expected at checkout. So the tenant might think, oh, that's fine, that's fair wear and tear, I can leave that as it is. But the landlord or the letting agent might not necessarily agree. So one of my tips, or what I think could be a good opportunity, is to, before the tenant checks out is probably have a conversation with them and just explain to them what is expected at checkout.
Almost the standard that you expect it to be returned to, because I mean,
Yeah.
you've just made a good point there, Mitch, about fair wear and tear. I've seen a few horror stories where tenants have considered holes in walls and things as fair wear and tear. Now I
Mm.
appreciate that's slightly left field, but with that, it's almost like, right, what is the standard that we expect it to be at when you
Yeah.
leave? It doesn't, obviously, with fair wear and tear, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Mm.
If you're providing a brand new toilet, for example, at the start of the tenancy, it would be hard to expect it to be pristine if that resident's been in there for
Yeah.
3 years. But equally, what is the level that is expected? And then if you can have that conversation earlier rather than later, the resident can obviously prepare for that.
Yeah.
And then if you've set those expectations, that's going to prevent an argument. I don't like the word argument, but it's going to prevent those problems arising later down the line. So I think that is one element, setting the expectation. I think within that as well, you've got a good area to provide a good level of customer service, specifically here thinking from an agent's point of view,
Yeah.
or even a private landlord. But if you've got your agents, I work predominantly within the build to rent sector, and they press a lot of focus on their high level of customer service because obviously it
Yeah.
reflects on their brand. There's no reason why that's not the same for agents either.
Yeah. It's a good point, that, because something that does come into conversation a lot is a dispute might be risen based on it. It's like the relationship you've got with the tenant. If you've got a good relationship with the tenant, then I suppose it's like almost like a football referee. Like if they don't like that team for whatever reason, they might be strict on them, for
He
example.
says
Yeah.
as he sat there in his Derby County
Yeah.
hoodie, up the Rams.
but but you know what I mean. It's like having that good relationship with the tenant means it just helps understand what is expected. It might encourage the tenant to make sure they look after the property better, because at the end of the day, that property is the landlord's asset. Making sure you have that positive relationship means the tenant will look after the property a bit better. If they haven't got a good relationship, then you do hear stories in the news about how tenants have left the property in an absolute dire state, and they go away and you can't get
and
hold
and
of
so,
them.
and sometimes that's due to a lack of respect between the parties. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that's always. There's always going to be a bad penny in the
Yeah.
bunch. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate we're talking from an ideal standpoint here.
Yeah.
But with that customer service element as well, if you consider sort of the engagement within the reports, now again, this wasn't a necessary plug for Inventory Hive, but what we do have within our platform is the ability for residents to engage
Yeah.
within that initial report. So when a check-in report goes over to the resident, they can add their two penneth, if you like. They
Yeah.
can pop their own comments on. So then they've really gone through that process. And what I've found in particular within the build to rent industry is where they've encouraged that engagement from the residents, they've looked after the building as a whole a hell of a lot better.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's almost a case of when that tenant has provided feedback at the start of the tenancy, then it reduces the chance of a dispute at the end. I want to thank Atlak for first of all commenting on our post, and say thanks for raising the points. If you've got to say anything, Atlak, just pop it in the comments. We can talk about those as well. But like I said, engaging with that tenant at the start of the tenancy just builds that positive relationship, reduces the chance of a dispute, because the tenant can also raise any maintenance issues early on in the tenancy. For example, the tenant might move in and notice a big crack on the ceiling, or a damp stain in the ceiling, or on the floor. Raising that at the start means it will get rectified earlier on, and it won't get any worse. So the tenant will get stung at that at checkout as well. So that is definitely something we'd recommend as
And
well.
going down the line on that one slightly as well, Mitch. The importance of interims and midterm inspections. Now, I won't delve into these because obviously we did we had a conversation on live
Mm,
stream a couple of weeks back about interims and midterm inspections, but that helps keep the quality of the occupancy high throughout
yes,
anyway. So again, sort of reinforcing the standards that would be expected upon vacating that property. It's sort of been held initially anyway. So
absolutely, yeah,
that's a good point to note.
yeah. Another point as well is it's quite often you find tenants leave stuff behind at the end of the tenancy. Like they might think, oh yeah, I can just leave this bin bag out. That's absolutely fine. Or I've got a sofa that I don't need anymore. I'll just leave that here. Whereas they might think that leaving that behind is beneficial to the landlord because they've got a free sofa. But what if the landlord doesn't want that sofa? The landlord has to
The
physically,
disposal cost.
yeah,
Yeah.
the landlord has to dispose of that. So that kind of goes back to the point of communicating with the landlord and agent and understanding what is expected at checkout. If they leave that behind, then even if they're just removing like a bin bag full of stuff, the cost to get someone to professionally clean that is still the same, whether it's just a quick visit to the property or not. So that is something which helps reduce the dispute as well, and obviously helps the tenant side. So
Yeah, I think obviously Mitch raised the point at the start that we've got a strong working relationship with the TDS, obviously dispute service, and they do provide their own sort of courses to help add a little bit more knowledge to the adjudication process.
yeah,
So it's always worth, if this is a subject that's interesting to you, taking a look at that as well. I know there's a lot
yeah,
of free materials both on our website and their website as well,
yeah,
which is obviously why we do these sorts of live streams. Don't get me wrong, me and Mitch love to sit here and have a chat, but
yeah,
equally we hope to add value to the industry and help improve standards along the way as
yeah.
well.
Something that we often see, Alex, when we onboard new clients is because we offer a lot of descriptions for property managers or inspectors to use when creating a check-in inventory report. It's often that they kind of go overboard on the description. So, but we typically advise people not to do that. Would you? Are you? Why do you
Yeah,
think you do that?
I think there's an element there that if you add, it's almost like too much is overwhelming to the resident potentially. Now, I'm not
Yeah,
saying it is, but if you're bombarding them with here's 8,000 photos for a two-bedroom apartment, they
yeah,
can then not get their back up because that's almost making the assumption of how somebody's going to feel. But it is an element of, well, oh, they're throwing all this at me, they're trying to baffle me, and then they'll have a negative connotation, and then
yeah,
equally they're probably not going to read the report
yeah. It,
because they've been given something that's a little bit too in depth.
exactly. Yeah, it's like I've got an example checking report on my screen here, and you'll notice that the inspector's not taken a photo of absolutely everything. They've not typed out paragraphs and paragraphs of each item in that room. Like you'll notice on the walls, for example, they've just said it's plastered and painted magnolia, picture hooks present, 6 in total, stencil on the wall. So they've just clearly outlined any issues and taken a photograph of that and added it in the report. There's no point taking lots and lots of photographs. There's no point taking a photograph of something that's in a good condition when you've already detailed that in your description.
As long as you've got a strong general overview photo, I'd completely agree with you,
Yeah,
Mitch.
absolutely.
So obviously we provide. Well, we have the facility within Imagehive to use 360 images. So that's where you can take one 360 image from the center of the room. You've got your written descriptions. If you're saying that something is plastered painted magnolia, you've got six hooks present, and then you can see that from the general overview photo as well. You then don't need another. I've seen it happen, Mitch, where people
Yeah.
will then take 30 images of the wall. You
Yes.
by all means on Inventory Hive, you have the facility to do that, but that would
But
then come to the point of, well, why do you need it if you've said something's good condition? You've already got your general overview photo, so you can see everything already. You've got your written description. Let's not bombard the resident with too much information that's going to make them feel overwhelmed and have that negative connotation. Equally, should it ever go to a dispute, and I know this is what we're
yeah,
talking and trying to avoid, we're giving the adjudicator the easiest job possible as well. So you want to be able to go, look, this is how it was at the start. It's clearly not like this anymore.
yeah,
Can we raise this out of their
yeah,
deposit, please?
yeah. When doing a checkout report as well, it's probably something that I personally like to advise letting agents or inventory clerks or whoever's doing the report is to, before submitting that checkout report to the tenant, I would probably have a common conversation with them or a bit of a negotiation with them and just say to them, look, these are the issues we've raised before we spring up any surprise with you and go straight to a dispute. Here are the issues. Are you willing to rectify these before any disputes are formally risen? Um, when doing checkout reports, we've got a few webinars on that, and one of the things is probably have that conversation with the tenant. Obviously, it helps build that relationship, and also you're not surprising them with any
It
any
It
stringent charges.
yeah, it goes back to that point I made earlier about good customer service in general, and that's why you see it a lot in the build to rent sector, because you want the positive coming back on the brand. Now, I appreciate with a lot of agents they might see the landlords as their clients, but equally the tenants, without the tenants being in there, and you'll see from a lot of reviews and such on like Google or whatever, if ever you come across an agent, you'll find a
Yeah,
lot of their reviews are from tenants that have
yeah,
that had the service. So
yeah,
it, it's a hard battle for an agent really, because you've got
yeah,
two sets of clients to
yeah,
please on the one
yeah.
property.
It's a tricky one because it's amazing how many reviews you see on Google of agents, and they are quite poor. And like I said, the reason that is probably because the tenant. It's not necessarily the agent's fault. It's probably because the tenant's
Ended
in a
up with a
bad
bad
mood.
yeah, they've had a
They
bad experience, and that's
exactly.
again not necessarily down to the agent's fault, but that's
Yeah,
where I mean good customer
yeah,
service element can
yeah,
help. And I'm hoping I'm not teaching anybody to suck eggs here with that comment, but I just think I find it quite valuable personally.
yeah. Absolutely. Um, so yeah, they're my main tips. There's quite a funny one really that we spoke about yesterday, and you actually laughed about this in the office with me yesterday. Is when I said,
Oh, I'm
make sure
wondering
you.
what you're about to say now.
Yeah, I said, don't you think it's good that you should keep a copy of the report? And you said, well, that's obvious. But the amount of people
That
who
is very true, yeah.
yeah, the amount of people who go to adjudications and don't have a copy of their checking report is,
And
you'd be quite
that goes for
surprised.
both, that should go for both parties as well.
Yeah,
And again, I think that's an oversight on my part, Mitch, because
yeah,
like you said, I laughed at you when you said it. I was like, well, surely it's obvious.
yeah,
If you're gonna go and try and do a checkout and argue that something's different to check-in, or
yeah,
in turn, if you're a tenant and you're trying to argue that it's the same as check-in, surely you need that proof from the
yeah.
start to be able to dispute it.
Yeah, if you're going to an adjudicator and saying, "Look, here's my checkout report. I've lost my check-in, but I do tell you this is what the condition was like," the adjudicator will be like, "Well,
How do I
y-
know?
how do I know?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, who do I believe here?" So on Imagehive, you get unlimited storage, and you can keep your reports on there as many as you like. So you can never lose your reports unless you delete them. And you can access them at any time. But from a tenant's point of view, then obviously make sure you keep a copy of that report.
And again,
Um,
that would come from setting the expectations as well, maybe as an agent or anybody involved in the lettings process. Maybe just advise them, just download a copy, save
yeah,
it, or save it in your emails, whatever it might be. And then you've just mentioned, Mitch, obviously on Inventory Hive, we've got the unlimited storage. When it comes to doing your checkout report, you can do side by side comparisons. So
yes,
the fridge, and I mentioned this before, the inside of your oven, fridge freezers, it looked like A at check-in, it looks like B at checkout. Come on, it's a
yeah,
mess.
I know. Yeah, it's and the thing as well, all the photos and descriptions are date and time stamped as well.
Yeah,
So it's not like it's impossible for someone to upload an old photograph because it will still capture that data from the original photograph date
this
as well.
sort of goes back to the engagement point that I
Mm,
mentioned earlier as well. But signatures,
yeah,
having both your resident moving in and also the inspector signing um, to confirm that they've done that inspection, or at least read that report. That's also powerful, because then when or if it comes to the checkout, it's like, look, you accepted this condition at the start, so that's clearly how it was. Within Inventory Hive, obviously, as I mentioned, you've got the ability as a resident to feed back on anything. You didn't feed back, you signed it. That means you're happy with it. So that's
yeah,
how it was.
perfect. I think that pretty much
Yeah.
comes to the end of today's brief live stream on top tips on reducing disputes. If anyone else has got any top tips, just pop them in the comments below. We'll respond back to every comment you put in, or you can just drop us a quick email at info@imagehive.co.uk and just find out why we can help reduce your disputes. So, although the platform was designed 5-6 years ago from Richard, our CEO, because he had a bad experience as a tenant, so he built it around protecting tenants, but also it helps protect landlords and letting agents and property managers as well.
It's
So
just providing a fair platform for all parties involved,
yeah,
essentially, and
exactly.
that's as you mentioned, it was designed 5-6 years ago. It's come from strength to strength, and we're only trying to improve
Yeah,
the industry as a whole.
absolutely.
So
Yeah. So again, thanks for everyone's time today. Thanks for the people who've put comments in. Again, just pop some more comments in if you've got any more questions, and please come back and watch us again in a couple of weeks' time. So yeah,
take care, all. Bye
cheers,
bye.
guys. Thank you.